Hello and welcome to this episode of The Rest is Entertainment with me, Marina Hyde.
And me, Richard Osman. Hello, Marina.
Hello, Richard. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm supposed to have been writing for the last week for the new Thursday Motor Club book, but all I've been doing is looking at the graphic of the Royal Albert Hall and how many tickets are left. That's literally all week. That's all I've done. But it's looking good. It's okay.
It's looking pretty good. We are doing in case you didn't hear this last week, we are doing a live show at the Royal Albert Hall, which is going to be super festive, have all sorts of games and delights and surprises. Special guests.
Special prizes.
It's on December the 4th.
I would do it this week, though, because I listen, as Kanye said, tell the promoter we need more seats. We just sold out all the floor seats. But yeah, and also exclusive, we're going to give away a House Against Wheelie luggage as one of our prizes.
Right, well, that's the stampede.
That's exciting, isn't it?
That's the end of the podcast. No one's going to listen after that.
But essentially, I've done that all week instead of writing. I was supposed to be writing, but I just keep clicking that thing and seeing the kind of coloured dots disappear.
It's quite mesmerising.
It is mesmerising.
What are we going to talk about this week?
Well, it's Halloween. It's so spooky, isn't it?
It is so spooky. My house is very spooky.
Are you a Halloween fan?
Oh, well, yeah, I have to. I've got 3 children of that age. I have to be. It's like the law. I mean, genuinely, I think it has been passed into law now.
Anyway, we're going to take the fun out of Halloween by talking about the box office of horror and how it's the last great genre in filmmaking. And there have been some extraordinary success stories in the last couple of years. We're talking about that. On a less spooky note, we're talking about Hallmark, and they've begun their countdown to Christmas, and we're going to talk about how that's going and what it entails. And
we're going to be talking about Churnalism.
Churnalism. So horror, Hallmark and Churnalism. Shall we start with, whoa, it's so spooky.
It is.
Halloween.
Pour yourself a pumpkin spice martini and settle down.
Is that a thing?
Yeah. No, wow. I don't know.
Oh, see, that's why
it will be a thing, by the way.
That's why you like Halloween.
I don't think I would like a pumpkin spice martini, I've got to say. Plain one, absolutely fine. It is horror, Hollywood's most successful genre, bar none. Of the 50 most profitable movies in Hollywood history, or most profitable, I should say.
And that means if made for the cheapest, then
return on investment.
Return on investment.
Return on investment. A third of them are horror. Okay, and something like the Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity. We're going to come to Blumhouse horror, which made Paranormal Activity, but both of those you'll remember used found footage, as it were, and so they were made incredibly cheaply. They've the greatest return on investment in Hollywood history.
Blair Witch Project,
and Paranormal Activity, because they were made so cheaply and they made so much money. Right back in the day, certain sort of places were associated with horror, like Universal, was founded by Carl Laemmle. They started and they carved out a niche for themselves, and they had Bela Lugosi as Dracula, Boris Karloff as Frankenstein, and they were always known as the horror kind of studio. And it's interesting that some of these lots of these sort of horrors Blumhouse distribute still through Universal today, because they've still got that sort of reputation for it in some ways. But horror is thriving, really thriving. Now, last weekend, they've had 28 titles have gone into wide release in 2024, which is by far the most in the modern era. Audiences go to cinemas for horror.
And young audiences particularly.
Young audiences. Horror fans want to see stuff in theatres. The box office is very good this year. It has been better, but that's partly a function of there just being more films out there. So if you look at the low-budget successes at the moment, there's been Long Legs, which has made... Have you seen that? I've seen this one.
That's the Nicolas Cage. Yeah,
Nick Cage.
He's like
a sort of a cultist who murders families with young daughters.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, that's
quite
classic Cage role. The Substance, which is this, that body horror thing, the substance that makes you look like a much younger version of yourself. Demi Moore stars, and I'm not even joking.
Wow.
Then Terrifier 3, which has just come... Now, this is a major success. That's just come out. It's an indie horror franchise. Obviously, it's the 3rd episode of it. The first one, by the way, didn't even go into cinemas. It did belatedly, but that was just made for absolutely no money.
Well, the first one, was made for like $38,000 or something.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Terrifier 3 cost... I think 2 million, and it opened at over 18 million in just one weekend.
And it genuinely looks, it's a bit sort of Saw-ish. It's like it's like almost all these films are. It's about a clown called Art the Clown, but it genuinely really
I've
gruesomely
seen the second
graphic.
one. It's horrible. But
Terrifier 3 is absolutely appalling. I mean, listen, except if you like that sort of thing, in which case it's amazing.
Yeah.
But made for 2 million, which I mean that's an episode of a TV drama. It's literally nothing.
It's nothing. And if you look at what this is really in its Joker Folie à Deux, which was, as we've talked about, has been a big flop and cost 200 million, and they would have to spend at least 150 to market it. Terrifier 3 comes out at the same weekend 2 of Joker 2, and obviously should have been quite far down the list, but beats it. So a $2 million movie has beat something that's basically cost them about 350 million plus all in its second week of release. Now that is incredible. First of all, for a third series of a franchise, as people always tell you, like, franchises get worse and blah, blah, blah. But this one is built and built, and it's becoming more and more successful.
It is also, by the way, an amazing name for a film.
Yeah.
Terrifier 3.
You know what you're getting.
Yeah, you really do, though, don't you?
And it has great audience scores, great critic reviews. Then the next weekend after that, you had Smile 2 come out, which obviously lots of things come out in Halloween month. Now, that was made for 28 million because it's more expensive. It's come from Paramount, and it did very well, the first one. But in the first weekend, it got 23 million. So that's, again, you should say, it's hard to sustain with a sequel. But these things really draw people back in. The horror franchises, people go back and back in.
And the interesting thing with Smile 2 as well, firstly, not a great name for a film. Certainly a horror film. Smile 2, you think, okay, I mean, that could be Hallmark. But one of the stars of it is called Ray Nicholson, and you can see him with this sort of great big, here's Johnny type grin, and that's because he is Jack Nicholson's son. And they've got so much amazing kind of traction from him being in that movie. But yes, it's a follow-up to Smile 1, unbelievably. It's made over 200 million worldwide already. I mean, that's a crazy number in a world where, as you say, Joker's Folie à Deux has done a Boris Johnson Unleashed and has absolutely tanked. Did very badly in week 2, by the way, the Boris Johnson book.
I know. People keep picking up your story. And then I saw somebody floating the conspiracy theory that bookshops have been telling people they haven't got it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's happening there.
Yes, bookshops are always trying not to make money.
Yeah, exactly. They're really trying not to sell a £30 hardback on the lead up to Christmas.
That they've got in stock. Speak No Evil, which has come out earlier this year, that cost 15 million. That's a Blumhouse film. It has, again, great scores, great critic reviews. That's already made 75 million around the world. Now, let's talk about Blumhouse.
Yes.
Blumhouse is a company which makes mostly horrors, not entirely, but mostly. And it's headed up by Jason Blum, who is, by the way, he is really interesting and articulate and brash. I hear a lot of people, think he's a complete dick. Having said that, I find him quite sort of compelling to listen to. There are obviously downsides.
You like a bad boy.
Well, he's an interesting boy because I tell you what he's done is something that, in that same way that lots of our listeners will be familiar with the story of Moneyball with Billy Beane, who the general manager of the Oakland A's, who works at this baseball system, and they've now obviously Michael Lewis wrote a great book about it and became a film.
Stats-based creativity.
Who works a stats-based system to kind of overperform for amount of money in baseball, right? Yeah. Now, Jason Blum did something slightly similar, which is that he thought, all those things that we said earlier, like horror is the best performing genre. You can make cheap horror. What I would say about horror is that, like, a not very good, a really quite good drama can still lose you money.
Yeah.
And a really quite bad horror can still be an investment. And he has worked out all of these sorts of things. And he started saying Paranormal Activity was a Blumhouse one. Now that cost £15,000. Wow. It's all found footage. And also with that, he found the template of how they were going to market their films. They have even audience shots, reaction shots in the trailer. So they had like shots of people sort of like, oh my God, this is terrifying. Because he understood that you could get people out to theatres because these young people want to go. That company has been incredibly ruthless and disciplined with budget. They do let creators and directors have their way, but they don't really ever want to go over 20 million. This has been a slightly substandard year for them by comparison of recent years. 2023, they had Five Nights at Freddy's, Megan, Insidious 5, Exorcist Believer. Collectively, Blumhouse movies made $800 million last year.
And they don't have huge stars in them. They don't worry about that. The idea itself is the star and the fright is the star. And, people, culturally, people are happy to go out and see that. It's like horror in some ways is it's sort of like Nando's in that you go there. If you're, teenage boys will always go for the extra hot, just to prove that they can do it extra hot. I'm lemon and herb. Isn't that terrible?
Oh my God.
Yeah. But I don't like horror either. I'm scared talking about it. I watched Saw once. I watched the entire thing, just the top half of the screen. I blocked out the bottom half of the screen with my hand. Yeah.
I used to watch them much more when I was younger, but now I find them quite sort of... But as a sort of cultural thing, I'm happy to sort of watch the ones that become kind of big deals.
But Blumhouse, with the quality control over what they do, it's sort of a license to print money. It's like a Wonka factory of horror.
But the studios, we have to say, this guy is showing you how it is possible to do this. You don't have to spend these huge amounts of money. It's relatively low risk. If most of your films are successful and one that costs 12, 13, 14 goes wrong, it doesn't really matter that much. I know, so much of this is so basic, but they don't want to hear it, the studios, and they don't want to look back at their own annals and think the biggest return on investment, the biggest banker really is horror. Also, all the things that we keep saying, it gets young people out to the cinema and they want to be in the cinema. What's really lovely about it is that it matters more and the feels are more intense when you're in an audience. People want to be scared together and they want to have that theatre experience.
That is lovely.
Yeah,
yes.
I think it's amazing. And you can lead these horses towards.
Yeah. And by the way, if you want to be scared in a big crowd, Royal Albert Hall, December the 4th.
That will be ours. But it does actually tie in. I know it's, sometimes we talk about budget and we think, oh, why are we talking about that? We want to talk about creativity. But I do think that in this genre particularly, creativity and budget kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It's almost a function of the genre in that we're scared of what we can't see, which is both terrifying and inexpensive.
Yeah.
And anticipation is a terrifying thing. It's all, POV, the killer, is often more scary in Hollywood than you see Michael Myers or whatever, but actually Michael Myers' point of view is more scary. It's the same thing that happens in Jaws, where they can't get the shark working and Spielberg's having this absolute nightmare. And as a sort of, it becomes the mother of invention. And so in general, they have to do all those amazing shots, which are so iconic, of looking up from below at people swimming silhouetted against the light in the sky above. And that is far more terrifying in many ways than when you finally sort of see the shark in all its glory.
Never show the shark.
Yeah.
That's the key. But we've talked a little bit recently in TV and in movies about talent and talent pay. And, horror, the other message, and the other lesson to learn from horror is you don't need to be spending 25 million on actors to be in these things. People are going to come out to these movies. As you say, they're happy to come to the movies. They're happy to watch horror. They do not need Timothée Chalamet to be in your horror film. They just don't need it. It's such a lesson for studios, which is people will come and see the films. People are not going out to see actors, particularly most of the time. Occasionally it'll work with a rom-com and stuff like that. But it's not a lesson that anybody ever seems to learn.
It launches lots of young, brilliant people who become brilliant actors and who become much more successful. Lots of final girls, as they call it. The last person not to be dead in a horror movie who has to face and fight the killer alone. Lots of great actresses in Hollywood have been launched as kind of final girls in lots of these franchises. But you don't need to spend money. And I would also say that they have a long afterlife, as it was.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Long Afterlife 2 is one of my favourites.
They're these streaming services like Shudder, Shout Factory, Screambox.
Screambox? Right, you must have made up at least one of those.
No, I haven't.
Shudder, Shout Factory and Screambox.
People pay for them. They'll pay £5. They're really well subscribed to. People pay £5 a month for them just because they're horror fans and they want to get those like dedicated channels. And when you consider what people might be paying for Netflix, that's just for one genre. And there's a really committed audience, like we've talked before about, sci-fi or whatever, or comic book fans. They're really committed and they want to experience things in the cinema and they want, they will have the communal terror, the communal joy. These are all the things that we're supposed to still want to happen in movie making, and we say don't happen anymore, but they do within horror.
Yeah, and it's interesting because is that just because it's horror? I do think there are wider lessons to be learned. One is you start looking at the numbers and this idea that young people don't go to the cinema. They do. Yeah. Older people don't go to the cinema. They're the ones who got out of the habit of it because we used to go to the cinema and now suddenly everything's at home. And so for us, that's like, oh my God, this is a novelty. This is extraordinary. I can watch this big movie at home. I can just be in my house. I don't have to get a babysitter. I don't have to stay out late. So for our generation, that's a huge thing. For the younger generation, it's the exact opposite, which is they can sit at home and watch everything they want by themselves, and someone is then saying to them, oh, by the way, do you know there's this sort of theme park where you can go and do this with loads of other people, and you can get snacks and you can kind of scream with loads of people.
It doesn't have to be 3 hours 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's really fine for it to be an hour 38.
Yeah.
People are very happy with that.
That's a generation for whom cinema is an incredible novelty, and we're the generation for whom home cinema is an incredible novelty. So, A, make films for those people. B, they don't really show much interest in who the stars of these things are. That's not something that interests them particularly. And so if you do want to start making big hit movies, just write great scripts that appeal to young people and don't put loads of stars in it. So you're going to save a fortune.
Giving the audience what they do. Horror directors and writers, and many of them are directors and writers, really think about what the audience wants and what they wanted, and they really know the fan base, and they are the fan base. And I know we talk so often about audience, and it's amazing how often people go into projects without actually considering what the audience for that project is. Whereas these people consider it all the time because they are it.
That's 100% right. And it's funny, really. So we talked about Mr. Beast as well, and about how he absolutely understands every single aspect of his audience and understands exactly what thumbnail to use and understands exactly what wording to use. I think we're going to get onto something in that realm when we talk about reach as well. But this is where I genuinely think that AI is going to come into things for the studios, because AI would understand what you're talking about. For Hollywood, it's hard culturally to understand that you can make a cheaper movie with fewer stars in it, because it's not in their DNA. It's just not, they're the star system. They're going to parties and, they're putting people on pedestals. AI doesn't care about any of that. AI will take every bit of data you've got and say, no, this person is not worth 12 million. This person is not worth 17 million. You can get someone for $100,000 to do this, and it wouldn't make a tiniest bit of difference to your bottom line. And I do think the big high ups at the studio, I don't think they're particularly using AI for creative things. I think that's a busted flush slightly. I mean, you can, there's various, bits of grunt work you can do, but using it for audience researching, using it for the moneyballization,
using it to
movies.
take the studio executives' jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
If you will.
If I was a studio executive, they're the ones who are most at risk in the studio system of AI. It was interesting. There was a thing which caused a big kerfuffle. ITV had advertised for like an AI person, an AI to come up with television ideas, and everyone worried about it a great deal. It seems to be an utter non-story from what I can tell from everybody. I talked to various people at ITV. It sounds like it's something from the technical department that shouldn't have been out there at all. But ITV are not going to use AI to come up with formats, because ITV doesn't need format. No one needs formats anymore. That's not an industry who's spending any money on. But yeah, I do think that that's such an obvious point, the horror thing and the lack of stars in it and the younger audience. It's such an obvious point, but the Hollywood does not seem to be getting. But I tell you who would get that, a machine. A machine would understand that and would churn out, not a script, but how about do a film like this with these sorts of people in it and release it at this time of year? That's an easy win. So in conclusion, the only people losing their jobs to AI would be extremely well-paid studio executives. I mean, it's interesting.
That's a horror movie, Richard.
Yeah, it's for them. But it's interesting because we both sort of know, and everyone listening knows, that's sort of not what's going to happen.
No.
Of course, the studio executives are not going to. They're going to be the last people sort of still hold up in the studios. And yet you look at it now and you think, well, that feels like the thing.
Yeah, this isn't Hollywood, Richard. The villains are going to win, even though it is Hollywood.
Villains. Talking of AI and what have you, can we talk about Reach, which is this newspaper conglomerate which owns some national newspapers and lots of regional ones as well? People will know Reach without knowing they know them.
They have the Express, the Star, the Mirror, but they also have absolutely tons of local titles. Manchester Evening News, Liverpool Echo, and loads of kind of local titles. And you will be able to see you're on a Reach website, I want to say, because it's not loading properly.
Oh my God.
We'll come to that in a minute.
Well, honestly, this is where people will really know Reach. Whenever you click on a story and it is impossible to read on your phone and there are 50 different pop-ups and it's like continue reading, and then you've clicked on an Omaze advert, and then, suddenly you're on the train and it's like playing a loud advert, and even though your phone is off, and it's absolutely impossible to navigate in any way whatsoever. That's Reach.
I'm afraid it is. And by the way, none of what follows is any shade whatsoever on Reach journalists
No,
who
absolutely.
who I have nothing but sympathy for, and we will come to who I consider to be the various. Don't want to say villains of the piece.
Well, it's been all about villains, hasn't
Yeah,
it?
it's all of.
Reach 2.
Yeah, there was a slight sort of play on this. This got a bit of traction last week because Martin Lewis. Someone pointed out to Martin Lewis that he was the subject of about 40 stories in a day. On Reach websites, all of which were sort of saying the same variety of nothing. They weren't,
and also all taken from things that he had written himself and
on his own his money saving
slightly reworded. So it wasn't
Yeah.
a journalist finding something out; it was a journalist looking at what he'd written and then putting that in a slightly different form of words. And 40 of them in one day.
It ties in with something that we heard of a few weeks ago when it was discovered that Reach journalists were being told they needed to try and hit 8 stories a day. Now, as someone who's worked a very long time in journalism, 8 stories a day, you're not doing any form of what anyone normal would consider journalism. You're just sitting in an office typing things. And its content, I would say it's loft insulation, but I guess it's all online, so it doesn't. But it's
not
really
even that. It's actually harmful to the insulation of your house.
And they've lost 800 journalists this year. Reach. I know they've recently hired 60 or whatever, but they've got a really tricky situation. I'm not saying that local news isn't hard. We'll come to some people who are doing brilliantly in local news in a bit, but they rely on ad revenue, which is why these websites, when you try and load them, are completely broken, and all this stuff kind of pops up. They now think then they also have relied on trying to get people to their content via social media. So in a way, what they are, and they've also got other liabilities. They've got a big pension deficit, and they've got all these phone hacking claims that's each year take a big sort of write down on those.
Apart from that, though.
Apart from that. And so the websites have so much on them because what they've gone for is quantity and not quality, this idea of churnalism. And, we were talking about we've talked about Netflix trying to adapt the thumbnail so that each is tailored to you. This is like a really weird lo-fi way of doing that, not a Mr. Beast way. It's that they're trying to if they're going to do a story about Martin Lewis, and everyone's got one Martin Lewis story, they reckon, they might read, and they're just trying to find a way of getting that via the headline. And if you're sort of and it results in local people who should be local news reporters sitting there in perhaps Liverpool, perhaps one of the other places where they own sort of big local news presences, writing stories about what happened to Liam Payne and trying to write sort of 10 of them a day because that's going to drive traffic. Now, in my view, that this is a real death spiral in terms of you're not going to deal with the downturns in advertising by just chucking out more stuff. The CEO of Reach is some guy called Jim Mullen. I have fair to say, I don't know, I haven't spoken to local journalists, but I've spoken to Mirror and Express journalists. Fair to say, he's not loved by them, and I imagine his appeal doesn't travel. He used to run Ladbrokes. I mean, I've got a bet for him. I bet he thinks he's in the ad business and not in journalism.
Yeah.
And I bet this strategy is going to go tits up. I'm sorry, I just think it is. I saw him recently he did some big speech about misinformation and the platforms and all this sort of stuff. The sort of thing that, one feels one should do as a sort of publisher of news. But it's like, you're not a publisher of news. You seem to be in the ad business and you're failing at the ad business.
Yeah, there's a movement abroad in the advertising industry at the moment that understands that, say, for example, you have 9,000 subscribers to a newsletter. You're of great deal more value to the advertising industry than someone who might get kind of 500,000 eyeballs on a series of stories. They have begun to really understand that return on investment on these journalism, clickbait things is absolutely not worth it. There's no money in it. Nothing is having cut through. If you're doing 40, stories on Martin Lewis and people are clicking on different versions of them and then something pops up, it's an incredibly inefficient way of doing advertising. So you're 100% right. Reach are in the ad business, but they are like in the ad business of the 2010s. Yeah. Certainly not of 2024. 2024 it is highly targeted, absolutely understanding the audience, absolutely appealing to a group of people, all of whom sort of share similar characteristics. So advertisers can absolutely target. That's the key thing for advertisers. And this feels like death spiral is sort of right because it doesn't feel to me like there's a good way out of this. If ever a story comes from this, for example, and sometimes they'll do stuff like I talked about that stuff, Nanogin that people put in their hair, and that came up on. But it's on like Gloucestershire Live and Birmingham Live, and you have all the and the poor person having to type this up. knowing that they're not helping the people
our
of Birmingham.
sympathies are totally with these people. And also, you can see that what people are doing now, if you're told to do it 8 times a day, do you not think they're feeding it into AI? Of course they are. They are self-mechanizing because it's so completely disparaging to be a journalist and said, you need to do 8 different stories about probably the same thing that Martin Lewis has said today. If you don't think you're just feeding that into AI, saying, write it again, but re-nose it on X, Y, or Z, it's completely pointless.
But this, by the way, is not some new fly-by-night company who's set up to do this sort of thing. No. This is one of our great newspaper
It's lots of our great newspapers.
Empires.
And it's what's really, it's interesting. Because I want to understand more about this, and I'm not brilliant on the technical side, but someone who is the head at The Guardian, the head of editorial innovation, Chris Moran, who's absolutely brilliant. He joined in a really, what he would describe as a very junior SEO role a long time ago.
And SEO is?
Search engine optimization.
Which is if you type in news, his job is to get The Guardian to be the first hit.
In it. And he said that right from the very start, when he was in that role, he thought, if I went into a commissioning meeting and said, this is trending now, we need to do some stories on it, people would look askance at him. Because he always understood that what The Guardian wanted to be about was responsible reach. So, journalism we believe in that is read as widely as possible. So they have had to, so they kept looking at how to do lots of things better. And in 2016, they came to what I wish that Reach would come to this knowledge now, which was that there was just too much stuff on the Guardian website.
Yeah.
And they looked at it and they pulled the data and they thought, God, about a third of what we publish gets fewer than 5,000 page views, which is basically nothing. Yeah. Just because the internet has infinite space, we can put everything here. So they thought, and then you get problems because you think, the sub doesn't know how to headline this story because it's actually quite boring and vague and we don't really know why it's here. It's been commissioned because it might become important. You can't give it any prominence because you don't quite know what it is. Anyway, there's too much stuff. So they came up with a relatively simple plan, which is they said, we're not going to tell any of you what to write or what to commission, but could you please publish a third less? Could you do exactly a third, because that's what the data has shown. Okay, so they gave them back the ability to say no to things, which is 50% of commissioning, and everything became much more curated, and which is obviously editing. And there was 0 drop in page views.
Oh, really?
It is quite clear that if you do things like that, you don't necessarily get a drop in pages. Also, people can find the good stuff.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous for this CEO to stand up and do speeches about misinformation. All this stuff because you're just adding to the general sort of mulch of stuff on the internet, and no one can sift through it to see what your important journalism is. There are important investigations in the Mirror, in the Express, all sorts of things. But it's very difficult to find them if there are also 40 stories in one day about Martin Lewis or whatever it is. Journalists, they've taken a sort of their lead from Mail Online, which is a sort of brilliant product and changed everything in lots of different ways, but it's not local news. This is and it built an international platform. Journalism stories in tabloids used to be about a classic one. You'd have to write 10 paragraphs. Maybe if your story was getting a page lead or whatever, you might get 15 paragraphs. Yeah. But now all stories are like 40 plus paragraphs because they're on one of those pages. If you look at Mail Online, they want to put all those pictures in and they want to divide up. So it's a very long thing.
Is that to make you spend more time on it, or?
Yeah. Okay. To spend more time, and also because you don't feel sort of cheated. Online, people often feel cheated if they see a tiny... Well, if you see in a newspaper thing and you get a tiny little nib, or news in brief, as it were, you understand the context. Yeah. If you go to a web page and there's like 5 paragraphs, you're like, what? Sorry, why have I come here? Why have you directed me here? Yeah. People don't want to feel cheated, so they feel they need to get something. And often you'll find those stories on Mail Online who will also do 40 stories on the sort of tragedy of Liam Payne. And many of them will be the same bottom half and a totally different top half. But they are in national, international news. And if you... So that is a different thing. And it has been very, very successful for them. But if you're doing that and you're in a local newspaper, you're not... and also you're in no way serving your community.
So Reach, just to be clear, has a series of national newspapers, but also bought a whole load of regional newspapers. Yeah. We know that regional press is in crisis, and actually it's never been more important, and people love local news and people love hyper-local news, but they bought a series of local titles, but are serving up, by and large, exactly the same as they're serving up, Gloucestershire, Birmingham, the Southwest, the borders.
Show me how it relates to Gloucestershire.
They're all getting the same thing.
And it's really interesting. As you say, local news has never been more important, but I'll tell you where all the great local news is happening now. It is happening on Substack. And individuals or very small collectives are writing it. Here are the great local... Wales, which is supposedly served by Reach and Wales Online, Will Hayward, who does a newsletter called the Will Hayward Newsletter, he's now in contention. He's won awards. He's in contention for awards. Joshie Herman, who does the Manchester Mill, the Bristol Cable, that's a cooperative and it's owned by. These people are doing amazing local news. Jim Waterson, who used to work at the Guardian, he's just started London Centric because he felt why London is totally underserved. What is the Evening Standard? It's ceased to be a proper local newspaper in such a long time ago. I mean, I personally remember, this is not something he said, but I remember there was no investigation. George Osborne was the editor. The night of the Grenfell Tower fire, he went off somewhere else to do one of his other jobs. There was absolutely no investigation into that. It's like this unbelievable crisis, terrible thing happened in the capital in the same postcode as your offices are, and you don't even do an investigation in all the years afterwards. I mean, what are you actually for? So whatever happened to the London Evening Standard, it does not serve its local community in any way. So Jim's idea was like, I think I would just like to do some reporting about the city I live in that lots of people would be interested in, because the capital, if you think of the huge budgets that the London Mayoralty has, if you don't have people scrutinising that on a local level, what does that mean? What does it say about all sorts of things? London is already a place where all sorts of corruption happens and where all sorts of people are there to help foreign interests kind of feather their nests or launder their money or whatever. If you don't have people reporting on your city and you're this big and there's this much going on, it's quite odd, isn't it?
Yeah, and by the way, there are a number of regional centres that do have great print newspapers still. But if you do have one of those, then hold it dear, because there are fewer and fewer of them. There's just not many. There's not many fully staffed big old school newspapers, absolutely, as you say, holding their communities to account. And, Reach has bought an awful lot of them. And they are now, telling you stories about, Martin Lewis.
Which, again, none of the journalists want to do. No, they did not get into journalism to sit there and write 8 stories about the same thing, which eventually I'm sure they will just be feeding into AI, because why wouldn't you?
But I do think, actually, it's a good news story in the end, because all those journalists who, as you say, got into journalism because they want to be in it, this is like they're cutting their teeth in this, environment, and they are not going to go anywhere near that sort of environment for the rest of their careers. They're going to avoid it like the plague. Reach is not going to find, their ad revenues going up and up and up, because, the model just isn't there anymore. And this incredible generation of journalists who have understood that they can do local news, hyper-local news, they can be paid for it and they can make money from it. That's the generation of journalists who need to be encouraged. People, as you said, like Jim Waterson and all these other people. It feels like one of those things where, big industry is really messed up, and we got a good kind of 5 or 6 years of these hyper-local sites until a Reach starts buying all those up as well, which of course they will do, and everyone will set out because they'll be given £4.5 million each, and they'll say, of course I'll do it, and then they'll aggregate it and they'll sell kind of, advertising from the middle. But it does feel like we have a site called Chiswick W4, Chiswick, and that's after the BBC, that's the next news site I go to, because I want to know what new shop is opening. That's what people like. And also, it talks about all the, everything in the local area. That is such a growth industry, and people have been shown to be prepared to pay for that sort of thing. And this Reach thing, it feels like one of those things that you'll be able to write about in the history books, about how journalism went mad and started to eat its own tail and started to sort of believe its own hype. And as you say, became an ad business just at the time where being an ad business, You're
getting into the ad business now. Amazing.
Yeah, that's a really, really good idea.
There's only one thing worse than letting journalists run your business side of your company, and that's taking decisions like this. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Sky, who are proud partners of The Rest is Entertainment, where you can watch Sky originals, including Sweetpea, a darkly comic thriller starring Ella Purnell.
Marina, do you like coming-of-age stories?
I most certainly do, Richard.
How about a coming-of-rage story?
Okay, yes, please.
That's clever, isn't it? Well, Sweetpea is a twisted coming-of-age story, as you say, starring Ella Purnell, who people might know from Yellow Jackets, Fallout as well. Unbelievable actor. She's Rhiannon, a quiet wallflower turned serial killer. So her life is pretty mundane at the beginning of it. She continuously is overlooked by her boss. A long-standing crush ignores her. A high school bully has resurfaced, and her dad is really sick. Then suddenly everything in her life is turned upside down. The wallflower is gone. In its place, a young woman capable of anything Can she keep her killer secret?
I can't wait to see this. I love any form of, anyone just finally having had enough and losing it.
Yeah, if you're looking for a thriller with a great bit of dark comedy, which is exactly what this is, it's unpredictable. Rhiannon's kill list keeps growing. No one is safe. But the big question is, will she get caught? It's funny. It's very, very dark. The performances are extraordinary. It's strongly recommended. So watch Sky Original Sweetpea from 10th of October on Sky. By the way, thank you to everyone who signed up for ad-free and all that stuff. Our first ever bonus episode is coming out this Friday for people who signed up to the club. If you don't sign up to the club, don't worry, we'll continue doing the podcast forever and ever and ever. But if you do want bonus things, and we were going to do a one-parter, it turned into a two-parter. What's it about?
It's about the life and oeuvre of Steven Seagal.
Yeah, it's a two-part, absolute in-depth. If you want those bonus episodes, sign up to the Rest of
That's
Entertainment
not a joke.
Club.
It is actually about that.
Yeah, it really is. And it's,
Sorry, it may seem like I was being ironic, and in some ways, it's an exercise in irony.
It's essentially you talking with me sitting with my mouth agape as you told me more and more things about Steven Seagal.
Enter our world.
Talking of wholesome movie stars, the Hallmark Channel. Christmas is officially beginning.
It is. Now, Hallmark Media is, as you know, they started as a sort of gifts and merchandise thing, and then they eventually got the Hallmark TV channel, and they have become, this sort of feel-good behemoth, and their Christmas season, Countdown to Christmas, where they have lots and lots of movies, and they're kind of dedicated Hallmark Channel stars star in them.
By the way, 47 brand new movies leading up to Christmas. 47 movies they've made.
Experience magic this holidays. The wider developments within Hallmark Media, though, are very interesting. There was a really interesting article in Variety, and there have been some other ones detailing their sort of how they're moving into new areas, how they're trying to get new audiences, but most specifically the sort of experience market.
Yeah.
Now, lots of people are doing experience things and bricks and mortar things. Netflix have bought places. A24 have bought their own theatre.
Taskmaster Live.
Lots of, as we've talked about this before, but they decided they were going to do a Christmas cruise. Okay, it's 4-day cruise, from the US.
Literally
4-day cruise going to the Bahamas.
Ever.
I know. It did sound like the best thing ever to many people because it sold out in hours. So they decided they better lay on a second boat. That sold out even quicker. They now have a 70,000 people waiting list and climbing to be part of this Hallmark cruise. So,
what happens on the cruise?
I mean, we don't know yet because it hasn't occurred. So I'd be absolutely fascinated what you can imagine what there'll be all sorts of Hallmark events. They'll definitely have guest stars of they have their sort of repertory company of Hallmark players. They'll be on it. Now, the other interesting deal they have done, and I find this the most fascinating in lots of ways, the Kansas City Hallmark are based in Kansas City, by the way. That's their headquarters. The Kansas City Chiefs, who you may know as Super Bowl winners, but you may also know as, the team that Taylor Swift's boyfriend plays for, Travis Kelce. Now, they have done a deal with the Hallmark Channel, as Kansas City Chiefs, and they're going to have their first movie, which is called it's called Holiday Touchdown, a Chiefs love story. That's coming out this Christmas, okay? It's the story of a Chiefs super fan and the Chiefs director of fan engagement. I wonder if she cares a little bit less about her career by the end of it. But I think we'll
wonder
find
if she
out.
goes to a small town and is taught the true meaning of Christmas.
Well, so that is really interesting, though. So you've got to do it. Okay, the whole thing with Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift has been really interesting because nothing could make the NFL rate higher.
It's huge. It's impossible to overestimate. It's the great ratings behemoth of American telly. American telly sort of doesn't exist without the NFL.
Except when Taylor Swift started turning up at Chiefs games, the ratings went even bigger because lots of young women were starting to watch just to see if they could see her. So the NFL has discovered that there are other ways to sort of grow the fan base. Yep. It's really interesting, actually. I was thinking, I didn't tell you this, but I was going to say this. Last week, I went to the to the Formula One exhibition, which is at the XL, okay? And it's really interesting. There were loads of groups of young women at that exhibition, and I tell you why they are all there. They are all there because of Drive to Survive, which is the Netflix show about Formula One, right? And in the old days, that would have been pure 100% male, all petrol heads.
Yeah.
It was really interesting. So I was going around, and I'm not actually that interested. I know the story of Formula One. Seeing all these young women sitting there reading the story of Bernie Ecclestone on the walls. I was like, oh my God, this is so mental. But anyway, so I know all those stories. So I was sort of more people watching in lots of ways. there was a young woman went, oh my God, they had the burned out car that Romain Grosjean crashed in the Bahrain Grand Prix in 2020, and it's extraordinary, you know, it's burning for sort of 27 seconds.
He was
and
fine, by the way.
And he walks out. Which is extraordinary because everyone thought, you know, he was a goner. One of these groups of young women went, they have the sort of burnt out chassis of this thing in the exhibition. And one of these women went, oh my God, Man on Fire. And I thought, she's literally, that is the title of the Netflix episode of Drive to Survive about that incident. So she's like quoting back their talking points to them. And I thought, this is really interesting. So you see, this is why it makes lots of sense for the Chiefs to reach out, for Hallmark to reach out and to do a deal with the Chiefs, because they think, oh, hang on, well, this could sort of bring more women fans into our sport.
And equally, it's for Hallmark, it's bringing more male fans
that's what
into
I'm saying
Hallmark.
To you.
Because,
do you think it is?
Yeah, of course it is. Because in the same way, look, sports, for me, has always been about characters. Yeah. Anyway, it's all about personality. It's all about stories. It's soap opera. Okay, you know, and the second you show people the characters in sport, it becomes much more interesting. There's empathy, and you can get far more involved. But equally, you know, Hallmark Christmas movies, and I'm going to go through a few of them. I absolutely love them, and you know, if we can find, I think Hallmark and the Kansas City Chiefs, maybe it's the future of humanity, because maybe it is that thing of saying,
men just want to sit down with an eggnog, and they want an excuse to say, you know what, I'm home. I want to watch a Hallmark holiday movie.
I honestly think 65% of men do. Yes,
I agree.
Yeah, and 35% of
just
men
looking for an excuse.
Don't. But they're the noisiest 35%. Unfortunately, in the same way that, you know, there's a huge female audience for sports which is completely underserved, and you know, it comes via, you know, actually understanding what on earth is going on. It's like getting into EastEnders sort of 17 years in. Yeah. You got to watch a few episodes before you understand who Ian Beale is. You know, that's
and
the same with.
And you don't want gatekeepers saying, but were you there when Arthur stole the Christmas card money? Because if you weren't, then go away.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want those. Yeah.
When there was 8 of us watching.
Sorry, who was your favourite fouler? No. Didn't even play in that side. Yeah. Right, yeah. Oh, shut up.
Yeah. Robbie. That hookup is amazing. Hallmark seems to be doing something that no one else is doing. Listen, we live in a world where all channels are sort of desperately trying to not lose money and, you know, sink into the sea. And they have absolutely, because, again, we're talking about that thing of reach and advertisers needing a real connection to a brand in order to advertise with them. And Hallmark has a real understanding of its audience, a real understanding of how to grow its audience, really knows what they want, how they want it, you know, is able to, you know, for example, these Christmas movies, they're now doing a big reality show called Finding Mr. Christmas, which is to find an actor for one of their Christmas movies. So, you know, the viewers are empowered in order to choose one. And the person who wins it, on Saturday, December the 21st, this movie is launching. It's called Happy Holidays. Stars Jessica Lowndes opposite the to-be-announced winner of Finding Mr. Christmas. The synopsis is this: a web page editor. Oh yeah, you're listening, Reach. A web page editor spending the holiday alone is drawn into an unusual encounter when she encounters a stray dog.
Oh.
Very much count me in. You know?
I wonder if she'll care a little bit less about that webpage by the end of it, Richard.
Do you think? No, I think this might be one where she goes, actually, after a while, the dog runs off, because dogs do, and she goes, I actually love my job at Reach. And I'm going to go, actually, I am going to go in on Boxing Day, because I do need to write about what Martin Lewis has to say about the interest rate mechanism.
You've crossed the streams, Richard. You've crossed the streams.
They got some amazing films coming out. They genuinely, listen, you know, we say all of this with love. The Hallmark Christmas movie stuff. Well, I mean, I'll sit and watch all of these. Following Yonder Star, when a scandal upends a famous TV mother's life ahead of the holiday, she heads to a luxury Vermont resort for Christmas. Upon arriving, a booking error, leads her to a quaint B&B owned by an astronomy teacher. She's
going to care a lot less about her career at the end of it.
I don't know.
Yes, Richard.
I don't know.
That is what happens to the women in these things. Let's just be realistic. Yes, they realise that some things are more important than their jobs.
I think she'll go, do you know what? Actually, I'm not interested in astronomy, it turns out. And what I actually love is my work. Operation Nutcracker. Okay, Operation Nutcracker.
She's a ball breaker from the big city.
Steven Seagal, no. An event planner must partner up with the heir to a local family dynasty to track down an antique nutcracker that goes missing before a holiday charity auction.
Oh my God. No computer could ever create such a scenario.
5 gold rings. They must have been searching for a film for that title for a really long time.
Imagine how many spec scripts they've rejected.
Called 5 gold rings. 2 calling birds. A New York City painter, Audrey Moss, returns to her small hometown in Minnesota for the holidays and is met with an unexpected request from her beloved late grandmother. Find the owners of the mysterious gold rings and return them to their rightful homes before Christmas morning, only 9 days away.
Oh, I love it.
Wow. And hold on, where's my absolute favourite? 'Tis the season to be Irish. We don't need to, that needn't detain us too long.
I will watch it though.
Of course. The Christmas Charade. A librarian's quiet life is turned upside down when she's forced to pose as the girlfriend of an undercover FBI agent working to catch an art thief before they can strike at a Christmas Eve charity ball.
We've all done it.
Count me in. I think this might be my favourite. Santa Tell Me, which again,
Yeah.
it's a good one. Olivia, she is a successful interior designer, and she finds an old letter from Santa promising she'll meet the love of her life by Christmas Eve and that his name will be Nick. Nice start. She then goes to her hometown and is stunned to meet 3 guys named Nick. Whoa, which Nick to pick?
We were talking about sport and bringing in new fans. This isn't something, by the way, that's just sort of limited to the NFL. It was quite a long time ago that I remember that when Ed Woodward was the chairman of Man United, and he said his competition was Vin Diesel movies. I mean, these are people who's like, there is something quite end times and soul crushing about this to some extent for lots of football fans, but these people who think that they're not in the football business, they're in the content business.
Yes.
And so Richard Arnold, also former CEO of Man United, said...
Richard Arnold, not Good Morning
Treasure,
Britain.
GMB, Richard Arnold. Biggest TV show in the world. Man United is the biggest TV show in the world. So what they would sort of want to say is, this thing that happens for 90 minutes on the pitch is just sort of a bit of it. But it is, as a sort of general principle, this is what we've seen in entertainment over the last few years, which is that if you're not growing and massively sort of increasing your audience in areas that you hadn't necessarily looked for them before, then you're actually in decline, even though it may not become obvious at first. So all these things like F1, bringing in huge numbers of new fans via these kind of quite unusual ways, which are now seeming more usual, these ways of bringing people into sport via different forms of documentary content and so on. But the Kansas City Chiefs and Hallmark is sort of set beyond even that, I think, to actually start using your name and being in Hallmark movies is super. They let them, they've let them use the stadium. They've got loads of, they've got real life chief staffs, the general manager.
Do you know what? I would hope they would let them use the stadium.
Yeah, of course. But they've got the coach. People are making cameos all the way through. So they're really trying to draw men into that Christmas content and hope it's
women
reciprocal.
into the NFL.
Yeah.
It's that thing we've talked about before, that everyone is trying to be a 4-quadrant business, which is older men, older women, younger men, younger women. And if you can appeal to all 4 of them, then you can make money forever and ever and ever. So Hallmark Countdown to Christmas, it's started already, unbelievably.
It has. There's a lot of movies to go through.
I think it might be a couple of weeks too early for me to really dip my toe in.
Not until after Bonfire Night.
Well, my birthday is November the 28th, and I always think Christmas begins just after that. It feels to me I can't be doing Christmas and birthday at the same time. No. Come on. It's 57 days till Christmas, and there are 47 of these movies, and you've got to have the odd day off here and again, every now and again to watch some NFL. So it's listen, there's a lot to pack in.
Strap in.
Any recommendations this week?
I am really enjoying Everyone Else Burns, the 2nd season on Channel 4, set in a kind of doomsday cult. Yeah. Simon Bird, Kate Flynn, Archer Riley. They've got Sean Clifford in this season. It's really, really good. It's written by Dylan Mapletoft and Ollie Taylor, and it's very, very funny. It is a family sitcom, but in a very twisted sense, and I'm enjoying the 2nd season of that.
And that is on Channel 4. Yeah. Well, it'll be on all 4, which is, of course, that's the important thing. Lovely, thank you. Well, should we reconvene for a questions and answers thing on Thursday?
Let's do that. See you then.
See you, everybody.